Israel did not lose God in one night. That's the part most people miss. It didn't start with Babylon at the gates. It didn't start with fire falling from heaven. It didn't even start with open rebellion. It started with three gods being invited into ordinary life, one promise at a time. One promised rain, one promised comfort, one demanded the unthinkable, and by the time Israel understood what those promises really cost, the glory of God was already on its way out. These three gods did not march into Israel from the outside. They were welcomed in from within. Their names were Baal, Asherah, and Moloch. And if you think this is just an ancient story about strange idols and people long gone, look closer. Because what they offered then is not that different from what still tempts people now. When Joshua led Israel across the Jordan, everything changed. For 40 years in the wilderness, God had provided directly: manna in the morning, water from the rock, clothes that did not wear out. The whole nation had been raised inside a kind of daily dependence that no farming civilization could understand. Then they entered Canaan, and the manna stopped. And that is where the pressure began. Now they had to plant, wait, hope for rain, trust the land. That is what made it so dangerous. Because Canaan's religious system was not just spiritual, it was economic. Baal was the storm god, the one people believed controlled rain, crops, fertility, and survival. In a land where one failed season could mean hunger or collapse, Baal worship did not feel to most people like irrational superstition. It felt practical, sensible, even responsible. That was the logic. Not total replacement at first, addition, just in case. Baal turned worship into a transaction. Do the ritual, get the result. Offer the sacrifice, secure the blessing. Keep the altar burning, keep the economy alive. It was religion as an insurance policy. And Israel, fresh out of the wilderness and scared of scarcity, started trying to keep Yahweh and Baal both. That is when Elijah stepped onto the stage. The book of Judges shows how fast that poison spread. Faith, compromise, idolatry, oppression, rescue. Then the cycle repeats again and again, every time they thought they could manage the compromise, and every time it pulled them lower. No voice, no fire, no answer. In the days of Ahab, Baal worship stopped being local folk religion and became state policy. Jezebel didn't arrive in Israel as a queen with private beliefs she kept to herself. She arrived like a missionary. She brought prophets of Baal and prophets of Asherah. She built institutions. She used royal power to fund false worship and silence the prophets of God. For one moment, the lie was exposed. One man against a nation that had learned to hedge its bets. One prophet standing in the middle of a people trying to serve the Lord and the storm god at the same time. And Elijah's challenge on Mount Carmel was devastatingly simple. The God who answers by fire is God. But here is the heartbreaking part. Even that did not cure Israel for long. Within a generation, Baal worship was back. Because false gods do not survive only on spectacle, they survive on fear. And Baal's promise was always aimed at fear. What if the rain doesn't come? What if God doesn't provide? What if trust is too risky? Baal's prophets screamed, danced, cut themselves, bled, and begged all day. That is how compromise begins. Then Elijah repaired the broken altar of the Lord, soaked the sacrifice with water, and prayed. Fire fell. It consumed everything: the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust, even the water in the trench. And when it was over, the people fell on their faces, not always with rebellion, sometimes with anxiety. But Baal was only the first god. The second one was quieter, and in some ways more dangerous. Her name was Asherah. That is why she sank so deep. That's how some of the deepest corruption enters a people, not first through the palace, but through the family. Through repetition, through the things children see so often they stop noticing how wrong they are. If Baal stood out on the hilltops, loud and public, Asherah came into the home. She was tied to fertility, sexuality, motherhood, and life itself. She was represented by carved poles, symbols, and small household figures. She did not need thunder to spread. She moved through kitchens, family habits, and ordinary domestic life. And over time, Asherah did something even more sinister. She was not always presented as a rival to Yahweh. Sometimes she was folded in beside him, absorbed into Israel's thinking, softly attached to the worship of God until people were no longer replacing him so much as reshaping him. Jeremiah describes whole families involved in her worship. Children gathering wood, fathers lighting the fire, women kneading dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. Just a household at work, ordinary, familiar, routine. That is always one of the most dangerous forms of idolatry. Not throwing God away, but editing him. Not denying him, but domesticating him. Not rejecting his name, but remaking his identity. And then came the moment that should make every reader stop cold. And he did it for years. Then the third god came into focus. And this is the one that reveals where the whole system was always headed: Moloch. The Holy of Holies was not just another room. It was the most sacred space in Israel, the place where heaven and earth were understood to meet, the place of the ark, the place of the mercy seat, the place no ordinary man entered. And into that place, Manasseh brought a lie and made God share his room with it. Baal taught people to think of worship as transaction. Asherah taught them to reshape God into something easier to live with. Moloch took that twisted logic to its final conclusion. The Holy of Holies was not just another room, it was the most sacred space in Israel, the place where heaven and earth were understood to meet, the place of the ark, the place of the mercy seat, the place no ordinary man entered. And into that place Manasseh brought a lie and made God share his room with it. Because Moloch demanded payment in flesh. From the outside, the religion still looked intact. Priests still served. Sacrifices still happened. The building was still standing. But something inside had shifted beyond what ritual could fix. The holy had been asked to coexist with the profane. Just sit with that for a second. No nation arrives there all at once. No parent wakes up one morning and leaps straight to that valley. That path is built slowly. First transaction, then compromise, then identity corruption, then the logic of the system reaches its full price. If the gods are vendors, then blessing can be bought. If blessing can be bought, then what is the ultimate payment? And when people stop asking whether the whole system is evil, they will eventually offer what should never be touched. That is why Moloch matters so much in this story. He reveals where false worship always goes when it is allowed to mature. It devours innocence. That is the true end of idolatry. Not freedom, not prosperity, not comfort. The Bible's prohibitions against giving children to Moloch exist because people were actually doing it. This was not imaginary horror, it was practiced. Kings of Judah, descendants of David, men sitting on covenant thrones, led their own sons into fire. And the place where it happened, the Topheth in the valley of Hinnom, became one of the darkest sights in all of Scripture. The drums were there to drown out the screams. Then, after decades of rot, one young king heard the actual words of God and broke down. His name was Josiah. Because reform starts there, not with image management, not with branding, with grief, with the sudden painful realization of how far a people have drifted from what God actually said. But even that revival did not last. He inherited a nation marinated in compromise. His grandfather was Manasseh. His father was wicked. The temple had been so neglected that the book of the law had effectively been lost inside it. But when the scroll was found and read before him, Josiah tore his clothes and wept. That is one of the saddest parts of the whole story. The greatest reform in Israel's history faded within a generation. The altars came back, the corruption returned, the nation slid again toward judgment. And then Ezekiel saw something devastating. He saw the glory of God move. Josiah moved hard and fast. He tore down altars, burned the Asherah pole, defiled the Topheth so it could not be used again, smashed what generations had normalized. Scripture gives him one of the highest commendations any king receives. He turned to the Lord with all his heart, soul, and might. Not explode, not thunder, move. That may be the most terrifying judgment in the whole Bible. Not flood, not plague, not fire, absence. God left. The temple still stood for a while after that. The rituals may have continued, but the building had already been vacated in the only way that truly mattered. From above the cherubim to the threshold, then eastward toward the Mount of Olives, pausing as though looking back one last time, then gone. And that is the point this whole story has been moving toward. Baal, Asherah, and Moloch did not just make Israel immoral. They made Israel uninhabitable for the presence of God, not because he was weak, because he is holy. Then centuries later, something astonishing happened. And that is what makes this whole story more than an ancient warning. A man stood on that same Mount of Olives and looked over Jerusalem. He did not turn away in silence, because Baal still lives anywhere faith becomes transaction, anywhere people treat God like a supplier instead of a father, anywhere blessing matters more than obedience. The glory that once departed returned with a human face, returned with tears, returned not to destroy, but to call, to warn, to save. The God who had left came back. Asherah still lives anywhere people reshape God to make him easier to tolerate. Anywhere holiness is trimmed away so comfort can survive. Anywhere the living God is edited into something softer, safer, smaller. And Moloch still lives anywhere innocence is sacrificed on the altar of necessity. Anywhere people tell themselves that something precious must be destroyed so the system can keep running. That is why this story matters now. Not so we can feel superior to Israel, but so we can see how compromise actually works. It rarely begins with open hatred of God. More often it begins with fear, convenience, and the temptation to improve what God already said. But every false god asks for more than it first admits. And in the end, if you let it stay long enough, it does not just take your rituals.